Test. There we go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We sure appreciate you taking the time tonight to come and be with us. We've had a great day of learning with Miss Dottie Laster this morning. She spent time with our clinical supervision team, which is made up of our counselors and our social workers, and then this afternoon, all of our staff, and then, of course, this evening for our community. And we know that there are many things to choose from on a Wednesday night in Artesia, and we're pleased that you've chosen to be with us. This is a very, very important topic. And let me tell you quickly how this came to be. Back in the summer, Mr. Thad Phipps, one of our assistant superintendents in charge of operations, participated in a conference regarding human trafficking, and it really was eye-opening for him, and he shared that with me. And in the meantime, I reached out to Chief Kirk Roberts, our chief of police here in Artesia, and he actually, in some classes that he took in Chicago, had taken classes presented by Dottie in Chicago, and Chief Roberts just really had nothing but good things to say about Dottie and the information that she can share and the experiences that she has had. One of her experiences back in 2005, she triggered what turned out to be the largest trafficking ring in U.S. history. And so she certainly knows what she's talking about and has the experience to back that up. And we're just really pleased to welcome her to Artesia. And she's from New Braunfels, Texas. And she, if you've been there, you know that that's a beautiful part of the world. And she's had some very nice things to say about Artesia. And we're glad to be able to try to be gracious hosts to her. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dottie and just say thanks again for being here, and appreciate you all being here and your interest in this program and in our attempt to help keep our kids in our community and in our region safer. So Dottie, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you, Superintendent Knoll, and Thad Phipps, and Danny Parker, and Joy Barr of Artesia Hotel, and everyone else that helped get me here. I cannot say with enough words how wonderful my experience has been coming here to Artesia. And I always loved New Mexico, but I think I love Artesia the most now, wherever I've been. It's a beautiful city. And I love the school district. I've actually been a substitute teacher, and my kids are grown, but of course, you know, I endured raising kids in school. And if I had another kid, which I don't, I made it, mine are grown, I would want them to go to school here. I really love being here and meeting the staff and faculty. And your chief of police, I want to really commend him. I was so happy to have him in my course, Chief Roberts. And when I started researching to come here, I saw that his department has been very proactive on this, and we'll see a headline or two in which it mentions your wonderful police department. And that's kind of rare with this issue I work on. So you guys have a lot here. And my goal here today is to let you know that trafficking occurs here, wherever here is for you. My beautiful town, when I moved in there, it's bigger now, but it was 48,000. There was trafficking there. I never even had to look far. In fact, I kept bumping into it. I was trying not to work where I live, but it became impossible. So I want you to understand that wherever here is, there's trafficking. So one place is not worse or bad than the other. But what makes the difference is the community not willing to accept it. And I believe Artesia is that community. So when I leave here, I hope I've planted enough seeds that Artesia will be extremely hostile to traffickers and extremely safe for victims. And I believe those seeds are already growing. I was a little delayed because I was in town near the hotel, and somebody had seen me speak and needed my help. So that is one seed already planted, and it's growing. So, okay, so let's get started on this. Human trafficking in the United States. I title it that because shouldn't that just be offensive to all of us? That people could be enslaved in the U.S., where we are the home of the brave, land of the free, one nation under God. We may fight, we may have difficulties, We may be debating how to deal with this pandemic, but we are still the place people flee to for freedom. And yet, you're going to find out we're not all free. And I don't want that to be the case. I love our country. So the topics we're going to talk about is the definition. So I make sure that we're all on the same page of what human trafficking is. Sometimes there's misunderstandings, or sometimes the term itself is horrible. It's the wrong term. But the UN laws in other countries started with it, and the US tried to mirror them. And the people that wrote the law, I met with them, they told us, we're sorry, we shouldn't have named it that, but we did. So there's a lot of, if we could go back in time and rewrite it, we'd call it something different, but we didn't. So how do traffickers lure victims? That's really the most important thing I think we need to take away from today, especially because we're at the school district. I know that we all have a love of our kids, our young adults, and our future. This is a beautiful example of that with your amazing football team, this wonderful school, and your great staff. So I think we can all agree that we don't want traffickers to profit or benefit from this beautiful community. I think we all understand why it matters to us, but I'll bring it home even further, why it matters even if you don't have kids, even if you kids are grown up like mine are and you survived raising them. There's still a lot of reasons why a community needs to not allow this. And then I'm going to leave you with tools to where you can help protect our children from it, yours and everyone else's, and also you can use them to make it much more risky for traffickers to harvest and groom from this area. So what is human trafficking? It's modern slavery. It's slavery. It's just slavery. It's the same as historical slavery, except it has a little bit more of a disguise. It's just as barbaric. It's just as brutal. And in some ways, well, it is actually more prolific than when slavery was legal. So I don't often quote research or statistics because we don't really know, but the numbers we do have a pretty big baseline on. And when I first started this, were that 27 million people are enslaved today. And at the height of when slavery was legal, it wasn't even a fraction of that. So, and every year, those numbers don't go down, they kind of just get added to. So still only about 1% of the victims get rescued and arrested. More of them get arrested than rescued, but a lot of them get missed. And either they save themselves, they don't survive, or they don't get found. So it's up to us to help them. They can't do it themselves. The law about human trafficking was passed in 2000 called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And it involves people being held in service of another through force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of commercial sex or forced labor. And we'll go through the definitions of those. I found that it's a very well-written law. It's worked for me every time I've needed to use it. What happens is it doesn't often get used. And it's up to us in the community to be the eyes and ears, to document what we see, and then also to report it effectively. Sometimes law enforcement wants to use it, but they just don't have enough information. So victims may be illegal immigrants. Quite often that happens, especially as something that begins as a smuggling scheme and turns really bad. I spoke with Chief Roberts at lunch today about what they've been seeing, and definitely some very horrific conditions of people held against their will. And after that, it may turn into forced labor or commercial sex. Once they've, extorted all the money they can out of them, if they still want more, then they're going to use them. So it's not somewhere else. He's definitely seeing it here. Also, they could be legal immigrants. One of the most violent cases recently I've worked on involved in harvesting strawberries. And the victim came here legally. He came here with a work visa, with a State Department interview, with everything that looked like this was a legitimate job, and it turned into be something very horrible for him. So it's not just illegal immigrants. It could be legal migrants. It could be U.S. citizens. I'm going to focus a lot on teens and young adults as we get into this presentation because in the last several years, that's what I saw mainly was teens and young adults being targeted and groomed and lured and recruited. So I want to take those tactics away from the traffickers and make them known to everybody. This is why trafficking is such a bad name for this law. It does not require movement of any kind. A child could be trafficked in their home. An adult could be a domestic servant and have never left where he or she grew up. It doesn't require movement. Sometimes movement is involved, but it's not required. So that's why I wish we could change the law. And I'll tell a quick funny story as we get into the laws. The main thing is that traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to control their victim. And I often give the example, if you put a gun to my head, all I've got to do is escape the gun. And I'm pretty non-compliant, so chances are I'll either, get hurt or try. I mean, I'm just, even as a kid, I just didn't follow some of the rules. But if you'd put it to her head, my daughter, I'll go, how high, where would you like me to jump? Yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and I'll never tell anyone. And so that's coercion. And there's a whole lot of other ways to do psychological coercion. But if you imagine who you love the most, if you're not complying, puts them in jeopardy, chances are you'll get compliant really quick and in a hurry. So that's what the law in 2000 was adjusted to include. Prior to that, you needed to prove someone had beat or forced or put a gun to their head. Now psychological coercion is considered the same as force. So forced labor, that is providing or obtaining of labor services through threats of serious harm, saying I'll call and have you deported, saying I'll hurt your family. And the language of the law is any scheme, pattern, or plan that places a victim in fear of harm or serious harm or harm to others. So I love that, any scheme, pattern, and plan, because in 18 years that I've done this, I started in 2003, I've seen limitless schemes, patterns, and plans. And so I like that the language really, addressed that. A lot of times you'll often see abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process. In fact, I'm working with a young adult right now that someone continually is threatening to call the police on her, although she's broke no laws. And I'm like, okay, I'll be home in 2 days. I dare him, let's go. I'll be there. Because sometimes people can misuse the processes that we want to protect us, but maybe they, have a way that they've worked around it. So trafficking is anyone held in service of another through force, fraud, or coercion for forced labor or commercial sex. So sex trafficking, we've got labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is compelling another to engage in commercial sex through force, fraud, or coercion. And I'll define commercial sex is anything of value traded for stripping, porn, or prostitution. It's not just money. It could be in exchange for rent or drugs or hierarchy in an organization or fill in the blank, you name it. But it's not a smuggling case where someone got raped. That's smuggling and raped. It's not someone that had sex with their boyfriend. So a lot of times you'll get confusion about the age of consent to sex. Consent with, a person is totally different than commercial sex, much like rape is not sex. This is different. And so really important federally, the federal law is that any minor, anyone under 18, that's 17 years, 364 days, cannot consent to commercial sex. In New Mexico, I think there was something to do with age of consent and adulthood, and they're moving towards mirroring the federal law. I'm not 100% sure where that stands now, but as far as helping a victim, any minor under 18, we don't allow them to consent to stripping, porn, or prostitution. We just don't. And so either it's worked out or the lawmakers will work it out, but it's going to move towards the federal definition, which is any minor. And a lot of states get caught up on this. They go, well, our age of consent to sex is whatever, 14, 15, 16. That's not the same thing. It's completely different. And so anytime you get asked that, I hope you'll voice that commercial sex is a totally different thing. So all parties in commercial sex under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act are responsible for the same level for any crime committed upon the victim. So if a victim dies due to the trafficking, not murdered, but dies due to the trafficking, then everyone, the person that bought that commercial sex out, the person that drove her there, the person that put the ad out, back page, they're all responsible the same civilly and criminally. And you'll see some of the websites have been taken down, and there's some major lawsuits over it, and even some criminal charges. I see a lot of hotels now are starting to be held responsible. So it's going to start affecting businesses that allow it to continue, and as it should. But it's also important that they understand what to look for. Under the federal charges, normally I also train law enforcement, so I put these in here. It's not as important to remember them as just to know that they're there. They're under the Civil Rights Code, because when a victim is held in servitude of another through force, fraud, or coercion, absolutely every one of their civil rights have been violated. And so the laws are under our civil rights statutes. And very important. It's illegal to hold someone's documents, either real or fake. That becomes another form of coercion, and that's another thing that was put into the law. So we find a lot with either minors or immigrants that ID limits you if you don't have it. Try going a week without an identification. It's pretty tough. So that's its own separate felony to hold people's identification, and that's a big red flag if somebody's doing that. I worked a case in California involving chiropractic massages. So they had a chiropractic doctor, they had a doctor's office. They claimed the doctor didn't know, but all the patients were men, and they were all prescribed massages, and the masseuses were brought in from an Eastern Asian country. And so I was lucky to be with ICE when they raided and arrested people. And when they hit the house, they found a locked cabinet with all the passports and a gun on top of it. Excellent evidence. They all pled guilty for many reasons, but that was one of them. It was proving that the victims could not get their identification. And the way they get it is they'll go, oh, you're new. In this case, I was in Orange County, California. Oh, you're new to the LA area. It's dangerous. Let us hold your passport for you. And then when they try to get it back, of course, they can't get it. So anyhow, that made just that act, that photograph was a felony all by itself. So under the transportation, this is the funny story I alluded to earlier. So I'm from Texas. I love my state. We were the second state to pass state-level human trafficking laws that mirror the federal laws. But it was like 2004 maybe, and not a lot of people understood trafficking. Back to that unfortunate word, trafficking. So I'm training law enforcement, and they said, well, where's the statute? I want to see it in my code book. And I go, that's a really good question. Let me get back to you on that, because I didn't know. So I kept looking for it. I couldn't find it. I go, I know it exists. I was there at the press conference with the senator when we announced it. Like, how can I not find it? And so, what do I do? There was no manual then. There was no one to ask. I mean, everything I've done, I kind of had to make it up because we were the first. The law was passed 2003. This is 2004. There's no people, there's like 2 people maybe running around like me training. So couldn't figure it out. I'm like, where is it? So I called the district attorney. I go, could you help me out? Because I know I saw that you prosecuted on this case. Where is it? It was in the transportation code. So up there among trailers and what lights you needed on your trailer was the trafficking code. And of course, they only meet every 2 years, so it took 2 years to fix it. It did get fixed. And you look at it now, it's funny now because it's been fixed, but you see the misunderstanding we start with, with this law, with this silly name. So anyhow, I love my state, and I'm happy to pick on it when it deserves it. Other things that changed, is it doesn't matter what the victim agreed to. And we'll see about grooming and luring. Sometimes they're in positions where they've maybe agreed to something, or they have agreed, but they were being manipulated, lied to, brainwashed, whatever. So the law takes away, it doesn't matter if they agreed to be smuggled and come to the United States. It's what happened afterwards. It's once they start being put out for labor or service. What if a teenager went away from home? I hate to use the word runaway because it makes us think, oh, we're not obligated. But let's say they ran away, but it was an adult luring them. So I'm really careful with my language to not use that word. But it doesn't matter if they ran away, because within about 48 hours, they're going to need food and a place to sleep, and there's going to be monsters that are ready to prey upon them for that. So even if they left on their own, they say, hey, you mom and dad, I hate school, that doesn't absolve our obligation to protect them. So that's why they put in the law, it doesn't matter what the victim initially consented to, it matters what happens next. We don't let people lose their civil rights. I mean, we feel like we do, we argue about it, but in this case, we have a law to protect from that. So, I was gonna say, I'll show you why you care, and I know you do, but when you look at the headlines these days, it seems like they're all isolated, but they're not, and they have the same common denominator. You've got Epstein. The man that let him go, the U.S. attorney, actually trained me the year before he did that. He knew what he was doing. Then you have Epstein rearrested. Then you have Maxwell. Then you have the Smallville case with Allison Mack and Rainier. Then you have R. Kelly case going on right now. All these have sex trafficking and children involved. Then you have the border crisis, where all these kids are suddenly here unaccompanied. Ask yourself, do you remember the story where smugglers were throwing kids over the border wall? They're dropping them over the wall? Why would they do that? Kids don't pay smugglers. Why are they literally just throwing little children over the wall? And then you find out that Health and Human Services has no answer for thousands of children. Where are they? And then when you look at where they've been placed with traffickers many times. Then you have, these are going to go through, let me see. So do you see the common denominator? Then you have ISIS, who's the biggest trafficker in the world. Then you have, I was hearing on the news today, Afghanistan, the refugees, and the child bride issue. I'm like, why is it an issue? We don't marry children. But all these children are brought here with adult men. Do you remember Haiti, the earthquake? That Laura Silsby name, she was prosecuted for taking orphans, who, by the way, had parents that were alive, to an orphanage in the Dominican Republic that didn't exist, with the intent of bringing them to the United States. Because if you get to the Dominican Republic going into the United States, it's not that difficult. So all these big news stories, what's in common? Child trafficking. That's how big it is. And then you look at these, the one before that, a woman trafficking drugs was charged with child abuse. A man with illegal firearms, child pornography. If you have drugs, you're going to have commercial sex and weapons. If you have weapons, you're going to have drugs and commercial sex. The three go hand in hand. I don't often find them separate, if ever. And this is here. There's also, this was 78 missing children were recovered with the help of Artesia Police Department. I'm so grateful to them. When you have missing kids, you have trafficking. I thought I was going to stop working trafficking, so I went to a missing persons nonprofit. We'll see later. I called it fast food trafficking. It was literally like I was at the drive-thru now helping serve all the trafficked victims. I thought I was getting out of it. I got further into it. Missing persons is definitely epicenter for this issue. And this young lady is 15 years old in that photograph. She's been arrested for prostitution. Is that the face of a child? That's the face of a child who's been through hell on earth. Do you notice the name? Montessori. Her grandmother developed the Montessori school system. She was murdered due to the trafficking at age 15. This is why we care. This is why everyone is at risk for this. That child did not have to fall into this. Of all the grandmothers to have, and we're here in a school district, which is why I include her. It touches every educator. She's gone now from us, and she won't be brought back. The man that murdered her was convicted. He was a buyer of sex. The pimp that put her out was never even inconvenienced. And that's not okay. We need to change that. He could still be arrested. I still try every so often. So let me tell you Emma's story. Emma is from San Antonio, and her parents were not wealthy, but upper income. They were doing okay. She went to the best school in our town. She was a cheerleader. She was straight A's. Just had Duke University pursuing her because she was going to study. Like she was just, everything was going to go her way. And her father died unexpectedly. He had a heart attack or stroke or something like that. So her mom and her sister and her are left behind, but they're still okay. Her grades are good. She's quiet. She doesn't get in trouble. She just studies a lot. She kind of retreats into books was the way of dealing with her father. And then one day at about 16 years old, she goes to a pizza parlor with an acquaintance. And her mother tells me, that's the day I lost my daughter, and I didn't know it. And we're going to pick up on Emma's story after I go through the rest of this. But I want you to hear all the details and then hear what happened next, because it could be any. Emma's any of our children. And that mother's plight is any parent's plight. So remember, straight A, friends, sports. She had this beautiful porcelain skin, black hair, blue eyes, had only kissed one boy, had never dated. I interviewed her sister, her best friend, her teachers. This is who she was. She was a bookworm. She was a nerd. She was going places. But she went to a pizza parlor one day. So what are kids like Emma targeted for? Prostitution, strip clubs, the forced or servile marriages where they're a domestic servant or worse, agricultural work, nannies, repetitive factory work. We talked about the strawberries. I didn't realize it, but when I was a kid, I rescued my first victim when I was about 16 years old. My mom and I saw someone older than I was that I went to high school with. He was working at a carnival. And my mom just knew it was really bad. And we could tell he couldn't tell us something. So we said, hey, why don't we pick you up for lunch? And we did. And he's like, you'll bring me back, right? You'll bring me back. We're like, uh-huh. And we drove him 2 hours away back to his mom's house. And he was upset the whole time, but we knew. And sure enough, then later I found out he was being forced to work. But there was no concept of trafficking at that time. But that was probably my first rescue, even though I didn't know it. And thank God Mom was there to help me because I wouldn't have known what to do. But, this isn't a new deal. And so, luckily we got him out of there. He's an adult man with a daughter now. He did good. So I'm glad we stepped up that day. But anyhow, these are just a short list of things that people are trafficked for. I've even had two cases that I worked on where children were forced to sing in churches and traveled around the U.S. singing. And when you'd see their schedule and meet with them and hear what happened, it was absolutely brutal. So no matter what it looks like up front, behind it, slavery was always brutal and very uncomfortable, even when singing. Another headline, Britney Spears, What did she allege? Child sex trafficking. She's being held against her will. I mean, just think of all her headlines and put them together. Oh my gosh, it's everywhere. It's touched us all. So the reason people don't reach out, victims can't get out, this is a short list, but, lack of legal counsel, bad guys saying, I'm going to get you arrested. A lot of times, first thing I do is get legal advice and show them either, yeah, you're vulnerable here, but let's defend it, or no, there's no way, this guy's, full of it. It's really fun when he's full of it, and I go, let him try, So, but, they don't know that, maybe especially if they're not an adult or they're not from here. I had one victim that was forced to rob a bank. And sure enough, when she did escape, he called and probably got the reward and turned her in for robbing the bank. But she had done everything. If you read the Uniform Code of Justice for the military, she had resisted in every way that a soldier resists an unlawful order. And I used that to get her free. She didn't get prosecuted. She got prosecuted but not convicted. And then years later, she was the star witness at his trial, and he got life in prison. But he had used her as a tool to rob a bank. She had done everything. She spilled the money. She didn't hide. She looked in the camera. She was begging to get arrested. She did everything she could to get arrested. And she even handed him the dye pack, and it went off, which I thought was great. I was like, good girl. So, legal counsel, advocacy. I wish I had known her before she got arrested for the bank robbery. I could have even stopped that. But anyhow, trust. Who do you trust after that? He had threatened to kill her grandfather, who was in a hospital. He was at the end of his life. And so she was compliant because she believed, and rightly so, that he would just go up there and smother him. So that's what kept her compliant. So the moment that he died, that's when she fled. She asked a police officer to arrest her in front of him. That was the only way she could get out. Another big red flag. Someone says, please arrest me. There might be something going on. So he arrested her and let her go, but I'm like, they didn't look any further. I'm like, come on. Why would someone ask you to arrest them? So maybe even down to medical and dental care. I worked on a project with MSNBC where we were calling in victims from, at that time, Backpage, which is now shuttered and shut down due to sex trafficking. We called them in. They thought it was just another appointment, and then we offered to rescue them. Well, we did. We rescued not all of them, but some of them. And one of them, she collapsed in my arms. She went unconscious. She had a cavity in every tooth and a molar with the nerve exposed. And to combat that, they put her on blood pressure medicine. I don't know who gave her the medicine. She was 18. And when it wore off, she went unconscious. And the problem is that is a very excruciating pain. She had lived with for months, if not almost a year. So we took her to an all-night dentist, and that was actually, I wish they'd have filmed that. That was comical, because he just did not comprehend this film crew, and I had bodyguards that were like 6'7" or whatever, and this teenager and he thought we were gonna rob him or something. I'm like, no, we're not gonna rob you. We just need help. So $1,800 later, we fixed this tooth, and then we're able to find out, more about what happened to her and get her free. But she could function. I mean, she was in so much pain. I mean, words just can't describe it. So she's much better now, by the way. She went back to college and did really well. So it could be any or all of those things that keep them from reaching out, but mainly fear, distrust, and we'll go through some of the grooming and luring. Sometimes I had one U.S. citizen victim, another cheerleader, straight A's, beautiful. I read some of her writing before she was trafficked, very, very well educated. Her parents both kind of thriving in life, even though they were divorced, and she wound up in a mental hospital 10 times and prosecuted into prison twice. And I helped her mom, and I uncovered everything. And we finally got her free of all that 2 years ago. She has not once been to a mental hospital and not once been arrested or even close to arrested. She's getting an amazing job hopefully in spite of her background. But she wasn't crazy and she wasn't a criminal. She was surrounded by an extremely brutal group of people that were exploiting her. They would take her, in one instance at least, to the oil fields on payday and let the oil rigs people do what they wanted. And her mom didn't understand. Of course, she didn't tell her. But she calls her from Amarillo, which is hundreds of miles from her home, and she says, "Come get me." And her mom's like, "I'm at work. Like, I don't understand." You know, she's a young adult. She's like, "How did you get there?" And so somehow the kid makes it back. She's in like early adult life, 19, 20. And she lays in her room on her bed with the covers up to her chin, shaking for 3 days. That was a trip to the mental hospital. However, now knowing what happened, you realize she wasn't crazy. She was traumatized beyond words. She couldn't explain it even. And so, again, it's like giving heart medicine to a cancer patient. It could be really great heart medicine, but it's not going to work. It might even hurt if you give it to the wrong patient. Well, that's what had happened to her. So repeated mental health hospitalizations, which were never necessary. We got her treated for long-term trauma. And it was only weeks, actually, and she's fine. Not fine that this has never gone from her life, but meaning she's not needing to be incarcerated or hospitalized. She's actually the strongest woman you'd ever meet. Like, she's fantastic. So, these are some of the reasons that victims get missed or even identified but incorrectly. So the other thing that they use is, I've been lucky to not deal with this too much, but drugs become part. Remember I said the weapons, the prostitution, the drugs? Most of the victims I've worked with were not drug addicts. Certainly that happens. It's out there. It's prevalent. I'm not saying it doesn't. Just in my lucky experience, because I'm not real patient with that. The victims might have had drugs that were given to them so that when they're being sold for sex, they don't flinch, or I like to say throw up when they see who's coming next, dry heave, the buyers don't like that. So they give them drugs to be compliant, but they're not necessarily drug addicted. So if we can get the drugs out of their system, they usually do okay. But a lot of them wind up with drug charges because drugs are around when this is happening, and usually they're the one that gets the blame. So I really watch anyone with those drug charges and see what's going on around them. I have a victim I'm helping now that's facing life in prison because the bad guys had lots of drugs, and they let her take the rap for it. And yeah, she had used drugs, but used drugs to get through the commercial sex part. And so I think we're going to get her free, though. I hope everyone will say a prayer for her. We should know in a month or two. She should not lose her life for that. She's beautiful. So victims are often invisible, like this woman I'm talking about. She's been through, the hardest part was making sure her own attorney would even just speak to me and entertain the idea of maybe her client wasn't guilty. Because I don't know if you've dealt with the legal system, a lot of especially the court-appointed attorneys, it's more about, can I protect their rights and get a lower sentence? Like going to trial and finding guilty or not guilty is often not on the table. And so it can be really hard just to get their own attorneys to understand this concept. And I fought like heck to get into her attorney, and then once I did, it was awesome. So I hope everyone will hold a prayer. I think we're going to win this one. And the prosecutor doesn't want to do wrong either, nor does the judge. I would give them credit. They're doing their role, but they just didn't know. A lot of times, victims are escorted or guarded. I talk to a lot of hospital personnel, so maybe when they come into a hospital, and I can't think of any of them that hadn't been in a hospital that I've worked with, the bad guy stays with them, so they can't say anything. And so I really urge any hospital workers, if you see someone speaking for the patient and intercepting the conversation, especially any pregnant minors, you really need to separate that out. And it's not just earshot, but I'm talking about eye through the door, get them away as far as you can, and then start, feeling around to see if there's more going on. That's a really good way to identify them. And most of them don't know that they have rights. So much bad thing has happened to them. How could they believe that they have human rights at this point by the time you meet them? And so sometimes you have to actually remind them of their rights. Traffickers might be members of the own family, again, when you're back in these hospital situations or even school situations. I notice a lot of time the traffickers will take children of unknown age, register them in school for a short amount of time while they don't, you can get them into school without showing all your documents right away. And they'll start to be the peer recruiter for other students. And then they'll move and disappear and do it to another school and another school. I've often found that parents will also take their kids out of school right before they traffic them, and they don't put them in another school. They don't want the school looking over their shoulder. So, watching who comes and goes in the school is very important. Usually the traffickers also had a higher legal status if it's an immigrant case than the person here. So the trafficker might have green card, U.S. citizenship, maybe and speak English very well. And so they kind of know the system more so than the person they're exploiting. And that can be a way the victims get hidden. And then the traffickers often use a division of labor. They may not work directly all the time together, but they definitely work in concert. They benefit from each other. So I've built a lot of task forces, and when you start a task force, there's a lot of infighting, and I just come and go, if y'all could just work like the traffickers do, we'd be off and running, because they are very coordinated. They work together, and they benefit each other. So a lot of times in the movies, like Taken, anyone saw Taken? Sadly, the bad part around the victims, all that was true. The rescuing and all that, parts of it were a little out there, but sometimes they're not necessarily held and locked, and that bit at the end with the big $100,000 selling of the kid and all that, they don't value humans that much, actually. It's just a constant mill of selling them over and over. But the idea that people would befriend them and lure them to a party and then, drug them or trick them or traumatize them, that part's really real. So they're not like locked in a room often, sometimes. It's more like it's a psychological coercion. So how do they do that? And think for a bad guy, it's a lot easier to control a kid's mind or a young adult than it is to lock them in a room, because it's kind of risky to lock them in a room. Remember the Ohio case where the kids have been missing for like 10 years? The one day that monster leaves the door open, they run out, they say the right thing, the police do the right thing, this guy's arrested in 0.2 seconds, and then he kills himself, because he's that kind of guy. And everyone knows what happened. Well, if he had taken time to groom and lure them, he could have left that door open every day. And so that's the difference. And that's why bad guys use this as opposed to that bad guy who's, unsuccessful, although he did a lot of damage. So anyhow, disguise, grooming, luring, and coercion, that should be as scary as that guy in Ohio that took those girls. So the disguises I call cans of soda. My daughter likes Dr. Pepper, my husband likes Coke. I think of polar bears and Christmas, Santa Claus, when you think of Coke. Mountain Dew, I think of kind of, skiing and snowboarding and, cool outdoor sports. But they're really just sugar and water. If you look at the ingredients, I bet the first several, pretty much the same on all of them. It's just an aluminum can with a pretty cover. And it appeals to the colors and the marketing scheme and the branding that we like. But you strip it all away, it's the same thing. Well, it's the same with traffickers. They're just that aluminum can that's shiny and glittery and appeals to whoever they're targeting and then whoever they're selling to. So on the stripping, or in the prostitution end, you have street prostitution, online prostitution, alcohol, escort. Like somehow escorting is less bad than the street prostitution. It's all just a can of soda. And for the victims, it's equally as barbaric no matter what the buyer pays. So that's why I call it cans of soda. It's just a disguise. So when they're targeting their marks, their teens and young adults, they might use feigned love. That's a strong one, works a lot. They might use the opportunity of, the one I worked in, I talked about earlier today. She was sure that this guy was the only person on the planet that could get her into the movie Baywatch. And I lived in LA. I mean, for the smallest part in Baywatch, there'll be a line around 4 blocks of people that you've seen on TV reading for it. But this guy's gonna get this girl who's never acted, who doesn't even have a headshot, who has no acting classes. She's gonna get into Baywatch. So luckily, as much as she disliked it, her mom brought her into me and we got that, straightened out. But she was ready to go, throw away everything. Told her mom she hated her and she was stupid, and So attention, status, opportunity. When you have no life experience, but you can't wait to get out there, it's a very good lure. It's like bait, on a hook for fish. And then, not every kid gets the parent lotto when they're born. They might get the opposite of that, so survival. I'm dealing with a kid right now that was kicked out at age 16 because her mom got a new husband and he didn't like her. And what's a kid at 16 supposed to do to live? She withdrew her from school and said, psst. And so that kid's 18 now. She survived, but it was bad. It was really bad. So survival's a big one too. So then that same can of soda, who is he gonna sell to? At least all these people, if not more. And the entertainment industry is barbaric. You should really watch any kids doing any type of entertainment. They should never go to any appointment alone, no photo shoots, no filming. They need someone with them that cares about them on every outcall. Every time, without fail. And they'll be told, oh, if your mom comes, then we can't let you move forward. Well, there's your big red flag. So please, any of those kids in entertainment, you need to keep watch on them. So here's the scheme. We target the kid. We find out what he or she wants, hopes, dreams, desires. And how cool is that? Wouldn't you love it if you meet someone, right away, and they listen to everything about you? We all love that. That's why psychologists get paid, a pretty good amount of money, because they just sit there and rattle on for an hour, and they go, 50 minutes, all right. But that's what this guy's doing in the beginning, whether it's a peer recruiter or the actual trafficker. They're gonna listen to the hopes, fears, dreams, wants, desires, arguments, and that kid is gonna go, wow, this guy really gets me. Well, she or he does not know that's intel gathering to then later use against them. They don't have the life experience to understand that. So then they're gonna start recruiting them. Hey, I'm the only one that's in touch with the casting director of Baywatch. After he's already learned about what she wants, he goes, oh, well, I just happen to have the answer to that desire that you have. Or a young man working out at a gym. He's real skinny. He was the nerd kid, again, out of San Antonio. Someone befriends him and said, hey, I can show you how to bulk up. So they work out for 6 months. And this guy listens to everything, hears them talk. Here's, all the girls that didn't go out with them. And he goes, I got some chicas for you, young man. He goes, come with me. Okay, Mom, I'll be right back. This kid's 19, paying all his bills. He still lives at home because he's going to college, but he paid for his truck, his tuition, just really doing good in life. Runs out the door without his shoes on. Says, I'll be right back, my friend needs a ride. A month later, he hasn't returned. The mom calls me, and I hear all this, and I figure out, a lot of investigation, we figured out he was taken to Mexico, to brothels in Mexico to guard the women in the brothels. He lost his truck. The only evidence we had is a truck crossed the border that night. But, of course, you don't know what happened after that. Well, long story short, I figured out the guy that recruited him. I found the safe house of the cartel, and I went and told him we would light their house up every day until they got him back. And they put him on a bus that night. And it only was scary because I had a really tall guy behind me that looked like, he could only growl or grunt, but I did all the talking. So I don't know why they were scared of me, but they were. and they got him back. And we look in the text messages we saw in his phone. There was a group text. You better get him on the bus now. This lady's crazy. She's going to light up all of our other illegal activity. Get him home. And this young man came back and curled up in the fetal position for weeks. So whatever happened over there was really bad. We got him back. Police responded, federal police, not local, 3 days after I got him back. That'd been a month since Mom reported him. So it's up to us to protect our kids. And they aren't always used for what we'd imagine. But the hook on that young man is, I'm a skinny little nerd kid, I'm really smart, I wish the girls would look at me. Then that guy said, I'll show you how to bulk up. Hey, come with me. I know there's some really great, girls that won't rebuff you. Yeah, it turned out really bad. So the grooming, the targeting, isolating. I was asked today, how do you know what's just normal teenage problems versus this? Sometimes you don't, they look the same. But if you see a young person or any person that begins to be isolated, they're losing their grades. They're starting to have fights with their moms and best friends. They've given up their sports. They no longer want to go to that university that's pursuing them. You just see this spiraling down from a full life to a very isolated life. Even if they're still home, they're not talking to anyone. They're upset. They're angry. They're, very combative, but you don't know why. And back to Emma, that was the clues she had, but she didn't know what they were. So when you get the isolating, that's where the bad guy's about to start to move in. They're going to induce some sort of trauma. During the isolating period, they'll also have some sleep deprivation and some food deprivation. So I always urge parents, spot check your kids at 3 a.m., at 1 a.m., see who they're texting, see if they're online, because the bad guys, even from a distance, will induce sleep deprivation. And then they'll show up and meet them, and the kid will think, oh, I'm just going outside to meet this person. And they might even sneak out of the house, but they don't know they're not coming back. And that's where it gets really scary. So then when that happens, when they get isolated, the bad guy's going to induce some sort of trauma. It might be trauma to the victim, or it may be trauma that the victim witnesses. They might witness someone getting beaten or killed or raped or whatever brand the soda guy uses. And so when that happens, especially to a young adult or child, their brain shatters. Their psyche shatters. It's like taking a broken glass and breaking it, and all these memories don't know where to be filed because they don't have a reference. And during that period, the trafficker will rewrite that kid's history. They will tell them the reason you feel this way is what your mom did, or your dad, or your school, whatever that kid cared about the most. And so their body will associate that pain with the person that loves them the most. And that's when you're trying to help them. They're walking around as if they have free will. And you say, here, honey, where have you been? I've been looking for you. Get away, I hate you, blah, blah, blah. And they'll literally run away. Well, that's that trauma and, inducing of trauma. Rewriting the history. And then at some point, the victim will get to learned helplessness. So Emma will learn, she got to learned helplessness, and there was no one in the world that she believed could help her. And that's what the bad guy wants. He wants them to walk around freely, to not be locked up like the guy in Ohio. He wants them to be no threat to them, to never tell parents or police what's happening, and to continue to produce money. And that's the learned helplessness, and that's the goal. So then, when you look at the victim I told you that was in the mental hospital 10 times, that was taken out and prostituted in many places, can you see how that would work? She can't tell. Who could, even with my words, I'm not really doing it justice, what happened to her. And so the learned helplessness, even though she gets in the mental hospital, they're fine. As soon as she gets out, they just reacquire her and go again, And they probably charge her for the day she's missing, against her quota. She better double it up, make more money. So what does it work? Mainly dissociation. Our brains are fantastic at getting us through horrible situations. And so we dissociate from reality, which is good. But that also makes victims not have very strong timelines, not have recall of certain events, to get time out of order. And so oftentimes they're thought to be lying or deceitful, but it's just the way our brain works. If you talk to women that have been prostituted, they won't remember the people that bought them because they're not really in their body in order to survive. The sad thing is, though, once they get out of that distorted bubble, and they literally are living in this distortion bubble, the brain then processes it, and it's more real later than when it happened, the trauma part. So that's why it's really difficult to help them. It's really difficult impossible. I mean, they do it, but it's almost impossible for them to escape on their own. They need our help. So, but mainly dissociation and that distorted bubble do a lot to keep them enslaved. The main thing about learned helplessness is if you do offer to help them, you need to find what the coercion is and remove it, and you need to be successful at it. You can't halfway help them. The consequences are brutal. So you must be successful, and that's why a team effort is required. You know, you talk about, just to put it in context, not the same, but, as we're pulling out of Afghanistan, and people that helped us are left behind, and now there's a list of names, they're going to face a pretty bad consequence. Well, it's a different situation, but similar to the victims. If you start to help them and they don't make it out, there's going to be punishment for them trying. And that's why they'd rather tell you, go away, leave me alone, I love what I'm doing, I'm my own free person. Once they start telling me I'm free, I'm like, no, you're not. If you have to say it, you're probably not. But that's why. And so you have to kind of hang with them through that and not give up on them and get help. So, after all this darkness, what can you do? Here's a quick video that introduces some of the tools that I've left for you here that I hope you'll share. I don't know, do I have my second-hand person there? Let me see. Yeah, there we go.
Social media is one of the primary tools that sex predators and human traffickers use to exploit children.
Now, local and federal law enforcement is teaming up with the Heidi Search Center to combat that problem with a unique digital DNA kit. Paul Venema shows us what the kit is and how it works.
Yes.
The digital DNA kit was developed by Dottie, the director of the Heidi Search Center. There's nothing complex about it. It's just a piece of paper.
And I went low tech, pen and paper. Sometimes those are still the best ways to gather information.
The thinking behind the kit: get as much information as you can concerning your child's social media activity. Information that would be vital to law enforcement for one big reason: if your child is missing.
Social media is the engine that predators are using to get to our children.
The kit takes keeping track of youngsters to a new level.
This is the next extension that really represents what our life is all about. And so much of it is online.
Getting the information you need to complete one of these kits may not be easy. After all, youngsters aren't always willing to share their social media information. In that case, the sheriff had a suggestion. Her suggestion: do a little detective work on your own.
It's about standing back, lurking, and standing in the background and getting the information that you can.
The kits are available online. Just go to the Heidi Search Center's website, HeidiSearchCenter.com. Paul Venema, KSAT 12 News.
This is an important topic, so we want to give you that website address again. It is HeidiSearchCenter.com, or you can call them directly at 210-650-0428.
So the Heidi Search Center doesn't exist anymore, but that kit is on the your website here, and so for the school. And also, in addition to that, is 55 things parents and grandparents should know. And it outlines some of the tactics that I've described and some other ones that we haven't had time to talk about. Not to tell parents what to do, but to give parents information so they can make informed parenting decisions, especially when it comes to online activity. One example is the trafficker targeting the kids wants the parents to see something inappropriate, delete it, and take the phone away. The problem is if that kid goes missing, that was the one tie that I might have needed to find her. The other thing is the bad guy's going to drop a device on the kid that no one knows about, and now he has unfettered access to communicate with that child. And so a lot of times I was seeing him go to school, and disappear like at 10 a.m. Parents don't really know they're missing till the evening or afternoon when they call all their friends and they find out, no, we didn't see her. And so that bad guy's got a really long head start. Or they go to bed at night and they sneak out at 3 a.m. and don't come back. And the parents, I mean, can you imagine you go to bed, your kid's there, you wake up to get them ready for school and they're gone. And you don't know where to look because they would always say they're not online. I'm like, yeah, they are. You just took the device. You don't understand. Kids don't need the device. They just need to log in. And so bad guy will give them access to that. So there's things like that that will help parents and grandparents to make informed decisions around things online and hopefully make it harder. You know, I typed the wrong address. I'm so sorry. My gosh, that's what happens when you do it at 3 a.m. You know the website here for the school. I should maybe sleep more. If you do have a victim that's you've identified or being groomed or lured, the most important thing you can do is exactly what the bad guy did. Listen. Listen, listen, listen. You want to absorb the information. Make notes, record it, whatever you got to do, but keep it because it may be important later. You also want to watch for nonverbal cues, like, I'm fine. And their foot's going like this, and leave me alone, I'm fine. When we have stress, we may be able to do good from here up, but the further down our body goes, it comes out, even if it's on your toe or your hand, or they're tapping, or they're fidgeting. That's a stress indicator. So you realize, okay, I'm on something sensitive. I need to look around this. You might need to let off the pressure, but you want to remember what was causing that stress. What was I asking? I use a lot of informal conversation, and I also, even though I might be busy and stressed, I will tell them I have all day. If you don't want to talk, I'm going to wait it out. And so here's an example. I had a kid that was 15. She was online, and we found people all over the U.S. that had images of her. They got arrested, but we still didn't find her. And I worked with the U.S. Marshals. It was a new law that's so beautiful in 2015 that allows U.S. Marshals to pursue missing kids the same as they do fugitives. And they have some very unique capabilities. Well, eventually we found her in a place where there was no internet. And not knowing who was inside, the marshals came in very aggressively to get the situation under control and make sure the child didn't get hurt. So it was scary. It was like 6 a.m., blowing through the windows, kind of like on TV. Actually, I thought it was funny now, but so they brought her back, and she was very upset, very angry. So she walks in my office, and she's like this. She didn't want to look at anybody, her dad, nobody. And her dad's like, help me, And so I said, would you like your dad to leave? And she's like, and he's like out the door. He's like, oh, thank God, because he's exhausted. And it's been horrible for him. And she won't say anything. And so I say, it's okay, I've got all day. I did not, by the way. I had like a huge amount of things, maybe even that particular press conference later that day. And so I'm like, I got all day. I'm here to wait. And so she's like this. And I go, God, your neck's going to be really tired. If you want to look at me, I promise I won't make eye contact. She still doesn't look at me. And she's been like that all the way from home to there. I mean, she's got to be aching by now. And so I go, well, are you mad at me? She goes, and then I know I've got her. And I'm like, it's okay, honey, I'd be mad at me too. So I don't take any attitude with them. I don't take any, well, you stupid girl, that's what we'd like to say, but I don't. And it turned out she was very embarrassed. Now, she could have died, and that wasn't helpful at that moment to tell her that. The marshals were begging with me, like their voice cracking, going, Dottie, you don't understand. She was going to be disappeared. We got there just in time. These people could have done it, and we never would have found her. And I go, okay, I'll talk to her. I promise. It'll be okay. And so anyhow, we talk. And when they crashed in, of course, it was very upsetting and embarrassing. It's like when you're out with the guy and your dad comes and picks you up. It's kind of embarrassing. Well, this is times 10,000 in her mind. And so I finally got it to break loose when she said, could you tell that man that I'm so sorry? And I'm like, oh, honey, yeah, I will. I'm not. But I'm not going to tell her that because it doesn't make sense at that moment. It's not helpful. And, she didn't know he got arrested and all that. I didn't need to tell her. I was like, oh, I'll get the message. It's okay. And then she started talking and laughing. She hugged her dad. She hugged me, and is now an adult and never had any more problems. And thank God she got to see adulthood. But when I say listen, I'm talking like hardcore, marathon, something you train for. It's actually something you have to really work at to listen like that. My background is conflict resolution, so luckily I have a master's degree basically in listening. And so that's what you need. You need to listen and be patient. And that doesn't mean you let them walk over you, like when she wasn't going to talk to me. I was like, oh, I got all day. You're not leaving. Luckily, she was a minor. It's like, well, you're not leaving until you say something. But, when you're ready. But that's what you need. If they're an adult, I take a different tactic. But kids, we can do that. They're so surprised to find out they have no rights. As a child, your parents have your rights. So sometimes they need to be reminded. It's really important to be aware of their culture, especially if you're dealing with an immigrant situation where someone's come to our country. One example is a victim from North Vietnam that wound up in Singapore and got trafficked from Singapore to the U.S. because at that time we had some unique immigration relationship where it was easy. So anyhow, I've learned a lot about immigration over the years. She kept saying, I don't need anything. She was rescued out of a horrible situation. She had nothing. I'm like, I know you must need something. It's like, I'm like, it's okay. And she was like nervous, when she was around us. And I'm like, what could that be? And then finally, it took me a little bit to figure it out. And mainly, I just figured the right question. And she thought that my country was going to hurt me for helping her because she was here illegally. She thought I could be arrested. I'm like, oh, no, my country loves you. And then I explained that I was paid by a grant, and that, because the next thing she thought it was my money that was buying, what I was offering her. No, the government, they have money that they take from criminals to put into a fund to help you. It's good, spend it. It came from people that didn't need that money. And she broke down and cried as I explained the United States, and I talked about human rights. And then any human that touches our country has human rights. Doesn't matter how they got here. And she and I are both crying by the time I'm done. I love our country. And so being aware of her culture really helped her to open up. She gave a statement. Those guys, it was so good, they all pled guilty. Didn't even have to go to trial. But if I hadn't have figured that out, she never would have said a word. She wouldn't have, because she was so afraid talking to me was going to get me hurt. And so when I told her, oh, no, it's my job, and they pay me, and they actually give me awards and stuff, she was like, I've never heard of a country like that. And she was so happy. So let's finish Emma's story. I'm not as happy as her story turned out, but there is some hope. So it turned out Emma at that pizza place had been targeted by a 26-year-old man who had been married before and divorced, 2 kids, several arrests and some prison time. Emma had kissed one boy and never dated. Can you see the imbalance? Her mom knew something was wrong, but never about this man until Emma was an adult, but they had already had abortion and evidence of sex prior to her being an adult. And as soon as the mom found out, she went and reported to police, but they didn't take the report. I read where she called. She actually did it. She said everything right. Nothing happened. 1626, that's enough difference. In our state, it's illegal. It's probably illegal in most states. But, So by this time, Emma's graduated, thrown away her plans to go to Duke University, and gotten a job in hospitals through a certification program, and she assists surgeons in surgery, and she's really good at it. But there's only a certain number of hospitals, and so every time she's on the job for a few months, she gets fired. But it's not due to performance, it's due to this 26-year-old causing a scene at the hospital. He's deliberately isolating any success she could get. Remember I think I said her mom's an esthetician. She has beautiful porcelain skin. After all the hospitals won't hire her, she's now outside mowing yards in South Texas in the summer. She is burnt literally like a French fry. And her mom, her whole business is skincare. She knows how detrimental it is. And she's like, I don't understand. And so her daughter got in an apartment, Emma. Her mom kept sending her furniture and helping her, and she's like, I don't know why my daughter hates me. She won't talk to me, you know. She won't talk to her friends. She won't talk to her sister. Her sister's afraid of her. And everything the mom buys for her gets pawned. And this is not the life this kid grew up in. She grew up in a fairly stable, affluent home. And years go by, then a child is born. She's never married this person, but he's always been there. Now she's mowing yards and doing manual labor for all of his family. And he's not a nice character, nor is anyone he knows or is related to. I looked up records on his family. The crime around them is ridiculous. There was so many calls for police reports that I couldn't count them all. I stopped at 150 pages. That's only 2 addresses. So years go by, kid's born. The grandmother, the mother of the victim, winds up getting the kid because they're not taking care of her. One incident, the kid wakes up. She can't wake either one of them up, her mom or the bad guy, and she thinks they're dead. So she's in an apartment complex and runs banging on doors. And somebody knew to call the grandmother. Grandmother picks her up. There's a huge police report. The mom wakes up, can't find her daughter, calls the police, reports her missing. Helicopters come. But luckily the child, can you imagine what could have happened to that child in an apartment complex? Like 900 apartments? That child could have gone missing forever. Or whatever. It wouldn't be good. So anyhow, the grandmother gets guardianship. Well, the victim dies. Her daughter dies. Not long ago. And the police come and they record all the evidence, and I watch the tapes, and they're like, this guy's lying, this guy's drunk. What he said happened, didn't happen, but no one investigates. They just say she committed suicide. I'm like, I can't say she did or didn't, but I can say I don't know. It doesn't make sense, all the things that were the evidence. And the investigator actually kind of finishes the questions. He asks him a question, the guy can't answer, so he finishes it for him. I'm like, what is this? You know, I'm not a police officer, but I am a private detective. I never answer questions for the person I'm interviewing. So the hope in the story is that little girl was under the care of her grandmother, but was not completely adopted by her grandmother. As soon as I met her mother, the grandmother, the mother of the victim, I urged her. She wanted me to investigate the death. She wanted me to do all kinds of things. I know, stop everything and adopt this child. You need to make sure that all parental ties are cut, or this will happen to your grandchild. And as a team with a lawyer, lawyers don't believe you can get rid of parental rights. I've helped 3 times. You can, when they need to be taken. When they need to be taken. So we were successful. No appeal is possible now, and that child has a hope of not winding up like her mom. But that mom lost her daughter. So if I had met her when that kid was 16, 17, 18, 20, 26, I believe we could have saved her. So I'm blessing all of you today that you can do that. I have learned in 18 years things I didn't think mattered did. Things I did that at the time I didn't know had an effect did. And it's always good. So I'm planting these seeds here, and I want you to save the next Emma. And I hope we never tell this story again. Thank you. So to end on a positive note, so I don't walk out of here crying along with you, I've told this story several times, and it gets me. What do they need? Emma needed someone to get in between her and the bad guy, and that was a scary thing. Even in the adoption case, I was trembling. It was scary. But if I'm afraid, how should she feel? How should that little child feel? So I make it go away with that. We need to allow them to tell their story when they're ready. Sometimes prosecution and arrest comes much later. It's a very big burden for a victim to carry. I love to teach about how to interview. That's a whole, several day course, but how to interview and talk to victims and the people around them, how to identify it. Did I go the wrong way? Yeah. Victims, runaways, illegal immigrants, I do away with all those terms. They're humans. Somebody's exploiting a human for their benefit. So we need to be patient with them. We need to throw away our social programming of the movie Pretty Woman, of the news that we hear, of this person is a problem and that person's a problem. They're just humans. We need to be patient. That's what's wrong. I'm going backwards. Oh, that makes sense. It's upside down. In conclusion, sorry, I digress. It's a long day. Human trafficking occurs here. Emma is all of our daughters, all of our sons, everyone we'll ever care about. Any minor in commercial sex is a victim of trafficking. Absolutely every time. Anyone argues with that? Call me. They won't win. Traffickers use schemes, patterns, and plans, and they operate in plain sight. It's not hidden away somewhere. It's not like Taken, where they're in another country. They're right here. Every child, including Emma, is all our responsibility. We can't allow these guys to profit from our loved ones. And I know Artesia loves their children, and they don't want bad guys to harvest your kids. So all children are our responsibility, even the ones that aren't ours. And I know that can be scary, but it's true. Everything you need, what is with me? I did this too late. Everything you need for tools is on the school website, which I typed very incorrectly. My apologies. I was up late last night, and I wanted the orange. My presentation was all blue, and I changed it to orange, and then I started trying to change words to make them fit, and I typed wrong. My apologies. But the most important thing is the bottom one, the green, teamwork. It takes all of us. Not one person could rescue Emma, but all of us could. And so today is a culmination of all that, where I spoke with school staff, I spoke with police and school staff, and I'm speaking with the community. You can make a difference. And I'll give a quick story just recently. Just a few days ago, I was sitting at a coffee shop in my hometown on the square. I live from a small town. It's really neat, too. We have a roundabout and a gazebo in the middle. It's awesome. Santa Claus rides in on a fire truck, at Christmas. It's so fun. Well, this man starts assaulting this woman right in front of me. And I'm just like, you're so unlucky. She's lucky you're not. He starts beating on her car. She locks the door. She gets on the phone. You can clearly tell she doesn't want anything to do with this person. He starts banging on the trunk, and he goes around and gets in the passenger side. I'm all right, that's it. And I call the police. And I give him a very good description of what's happening. She's in fear. He's violently hitting her car. He's aggressive. No, he hasn't hit her yet, but it looks like it's escalating. Very simple, but powerful words. I described her look, his look, the license plate, the color of the car. They've got all the information they need. They show up like boom. And he has driven her car away. She's gotten out. Clearly, she'd rather get out and vacate the car than be in with him. They find her. They question her. They bring him back walking, which means they took the car from him. And eventually, he got arrested. She got to go home and be safe that day. Maybe rattled, maybe scared, but not hurt. And if there was like 20 people there, no one else called. I know because I was on the phone with the dispatcher, and I called him 3 times. And what I'm saying is, my thought is as soon as I saw it didn't de-escalate, I called police because they can sort it out. But I gave him really good trained information. I wasn't that good the first time I ever did that. But 18 years later, I'm really skilled at it. You have all the tools you need for that. You have a wonderful police department. And you can let that young woman, Emma, whoever, go home safely that night. And I bless you and urge you to do so. Because a couple of times of that, they'll just go somewhere else. They won't want to operate here. So Thank you, and you are the key to getting them out of this town. And maybe they're not here, but the internet's here, so they're here. Thank you.
Dottie, thank you very much for being with us. And, this presentation will be posted on KSVP TV's website. So if you know of others who need to hear this message, please share that information with them and encourage them to check that out. We appreciate the day that you spent with us. It's been a long day, but it's been a good day.
Thank you.
Learning for me personally and for our community. I do have some Bulldog gear.
Woo!
Full of some fun stuff, but I'm going to give it to Stephanie.
She might share with me if I'm nice to her.
Fun stuff for you and your mom, okay?
I love it. Thank you. Notice she's wearing your colors.
She looks good in our colors.
And I wore orange earlier today, so, and I failed at getting orange up there, but I tried. So it's at bulldogs.com. Any of those tools, I hope you'll get them, download them, share them, use them, post them around the street. I don't care, they're yours to use. Thank you.